are Ben Pimentel, our esteemed guests, Maria Ressa and Ramona Diaz. I'm Naomi Takuyan. I'm the Executive Director of AAJA, and I just also want to introduce our convention programming co-chair, Lizelle Tung Lau, to welcome you this evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for attending our talkback for the film A Thousand Cuts with Maria Ressa and Ramona Diaz. Our moderator tonight is Ben Pimentel. Ben?
Hi, good evening to those in the States, and good morning, Maria, in Manila. So let's get started. I'm going to do some quick intros for two speakers. Ramona Diaz is here, is an award-winning filmmaker. She directed Spirits Rising, about the women who took part in the 1986 People Power Uprising, which led to the downfall of Ferdinand Marcos. She was also the producer of Imelda, about Imelda Marcos, the wife of the late dictator, the really powerful movie. She also did Don't Stop Believing, about Filipino artist Arnel Pineda, who became the lead singer of the band Journey. And of course, she's the producer and director of A Thousand Cuts, which hopefully many of you got to watch. And Ramona is joining us from Baltimore or yes. Washington, D.C.? Baltimore, okay.
Baltimore, great. Yeah.
And of course, we have Maria Ressa, who is the CEO and executive editor of Rappler. She was with CNN for 18 years, serving as Manila Bureau Chief and Jakarta Bureau Chief. And she subsequently led the news division of ABS-CBN, which is like a CNN or CBS or NBC in the Philippines in the mid-2000s, before launching Rappler, which is an independent news outlet. She's received numerous awards and honors for journalism in a role in the fight against media repression, including being named one of the journalists who were named as Persons of the Year by Time Magazine in 2017 or 2018. 2017. 18. Okay. Maria is joining us from Manila, which it just went back to lockdown due to COVID-19, so we're very grateful for joining us. So thank you all for being here. Let's start with the context of making the film. Can you tell us about the moment when you and Ramona decided, yeah, let's do this film, and how did that conversation go?
Oh, was that for Maria or for?
For you, let's start with you.
Okay, how did that conversation, well, yeah, you know, my initial plan was really the drug war. I went back to the Philippines in late 2017 to, I had a sort of nebulous idea to make a film about the drug war, because I had seen the photographs, right? They were so horrific. I'm sure most of us have seen it. And I was really alarmed, you know, just look at those photographs. So I went back to the Philippines in late 2017 and then realized a lot of people were making films already about the drug war. So I looked around and I knew I wanted to make a film about the Philippines under Duterte. That was really, that I was sure, because something was really, I grew up under martial law and I was really alarmed that something was going on. It was just a gut instinct that was amiss, you know. So I looked around and I listened and observed, and there was Maria, you know, she was questioning the drug war. She and Rappler, right? So, the reporters at Rappler as well were questioning the drug war. They were questioning the numbers because there was a big discrepancy between the numbers of the government, official numbers, and the numbers of the human rights organizations. So she was calling that out, and she was also connecting that to disinformation and impunity. She was also talking about, but then this was like, she started talking about algorithms and fake news and the erosion of democracy, all that combined, right? The intersectionality of all that in 2016, way before anyone was talking about it. So to me, that made the story really different from just look at the drug war. So I could look at the drug war through that prism, and it made it more global, because this information, as you know, is global. People understand what that is, or sort of understand. They've heard it, not necessarily knowing what that was, what it is really. And that's why we tried to unpack it in the film. So I asked Maria if I could film her. I mean, I actually called Sheila Coronel, because Sheila Coronel is advisor on the film. And I was in Manila. I said, Sheila, I got to meet Maria. Can you introduce me? She goes, I'm sitting here. Where were you, in Lisbon or some journalism conference? She's right beside me. She said she'll meet with you when she gets back to Manila. So we met, and I proposed to her an idea of making a film. She wasn't really the main character. She was one of many characters that was going to follow, I guess, the backdrop of the midterm elections. I decided, because that's the container of the film. And then obviously, she became 10 Person of the Year. But when we started shooting, she got arrested twice in 5 weeks. And then she really was a target of the Duterte administration. So obviously, the center of gravity of the film changes as you film. That's how I film. I really follow, and really am open to pivoting if the story changes. And she became the major character. I hate to say character because she's right here, the major subject of the film. But yeah, so that's how it was. Why she said yes? I mean, she said yes in spite of the fact that in 2004, she requested an interview because I was in Manila. I made a film about Imelda Marcos, right? And Imelda sued us in the Philippines. So I had to fly to Manila to defend the film. And Maria wanted to interview me while I was in Manila, but someone told me, she doesn't really like the film, Imelda. I'm like, I don't really want to talk to her because I'm really so tired, and I don't want to be grilled by Maria Ressa of CNN, right? She was like the face of CNN then. So I turned her down. So when I asked her 14 years later if she could be in the film, I was really hoping she wouldn't remember, but she remembered, right? And she actually asked me about it that first meeting. I'm like, I was young. Let bygones be bygones. Let's move on.
That's a good segue to Maria and about accepting or being willing to be profiled in the documentary.
So, well, first of all, thank you so much. I mean, how wonderful to see on my screen Filipino Americans. That is incredible. Naomi, Lizelle, Ben, Boying, not but who I must call Ben, and then Ramona, who also has Monina. I mean, that's
God, yeah, that's my childhood friends.
Yeah. At that point when she came in, it was already a madhouse, and the president had already attacked us. We had already weathered more than a year of these exponential attacks on social media. And I knew that I wanted to have it documented, right? We were living through something that, who knew where it was going to lead? And I didn't know where it was going to lead, but I had actually asked our production team, guys, we have to preserve this. We have to document, and we didn't have time. We didn't have resources. That's not to downplay Ramona, but here she comes, she walks in, and then I reminded her, by the way, why did you turn down that interview with CNN? Right? And it's funny because I watched her eyes, and then she was like, that was a key moment. Because if she had pretended she didn't know, I would okay, I can't trust this person.
No, I would never have pretended I didn't know. I would have.
Exactly. Yeah. So she passed the first test, right? But I think there were three reasons. One is precisely because she's Filipino American. That was interesting to me because we bridge different worlds. Our worldviews are different. We are part of both and part of neither in many instances, right? So that was one. She had a track record. I knew she did cinema verite, some of which I debated with her, so we finally did have the discussion about Imelda later on. Anyway.
We're still having it. But,
and it is about Hamilton's who gets to tell the story, right? I mean, and then the second reason is because she asked. So we needed it. She was Filipino American. And then she asked, and she was honest. I think that was critical for me. She told me that, I'm going to cover all sides. And I didn't much care, frankly, what she was doing with the film, because for me, what was most important for me in Rappler is that there's documentation. Just having another camera there that isn't us, that, can record it, because we all know we're living through historic times, right? I mean, and I wanted to preserve some of that, to look back later on.
So she, you know, at the end of the day, I was allowed in places that we had no business being in, right? So, in really like lawyers' meetings that I knew I could never use. I knew I could never use it because there were some things that were really sensitive, and I would never want to put anything that would jeopardize strategy and all that, right? So, even if I knew, okay, I can never use this, but we're here, let's let's film it. So I have all those things. It was crazy. And I looked at around. I'm like, are we supposed to be here? I'm like, just shut up and film, you know? Yeah. So it's really amazing, the access and the trust they gave us.
So it was clearly a tough film to make, given that things were unfolding, especially the midterm elections in the Philippines. What was the toughest time? Was there a time when you both thought of quitting and maybe saying, okay, we shouldn't do this, so we should just give up?
But that's how I film. I film life unfolding. I kind of like that. You know, I always say if I know how it's going to end, I should just be doing fiction. Because it's a crazy way to make a film because you really, you have to be 1,000% engaged every day because you're trying to figure out what to film and where the camera should be at every minute, right? I mean, the most difficult times are, of course, when she was arrested, because the minute she was arrested, I have to fight with the broadcasters, right? The news people who basically helicopter in and then all jockey for position. We sort of don't know how to do that. So what we did was we filmed them filming her, right? We just zoomed out. Those were the toughest times. And of course, following, the other candidates was tough too, because there are some places we couldn't go, like deep south, in the deep south, we couldn't go, like Holo and stuff like that. Yeah.
I want to give a quick snapshot of what the situation is for you, Maria, especially for Rappler. So you have Duterte was elected in 2016, unleashed this campaign that was purportedly against illegal drugs, but which morphed into this bloody mass slaughter of mostly poor Filipinos. Some points that were not in the film, one of his prominent critics, Senator Laila de Lima, has been in prison since 2017. And then just recently, a major TV broadcast company, ABS-CBN, which you had led before, was forced to shut down. And of course, we've lost count on how many legal cases they filed against you. You've been arrested a couple of times. How have you, and then you have the pandemic and the lockdown, which has led to more authoritarian tactics.
And the anti-terror law, don't forget.
And what?
And the anti-terror law.
And the terror law, which pretty much formalized authoritarian rule in the Philippines. How has Rappler adapted to these changes, given that you've been in the spotlight so much?
We hold the line, even more, we hold the line. And, what many of the people watching may not know is that Ben Pimentel, Boying, I can't think of you, but, here in the Philippines, when you're reporting on something, the pressure is immense to conform. It's really the 3 C's: corrupt, coerce, co-opt. And if you don't do any of these 3, you are like the hammer, you are like the nail that stands up and the hammer comes down on you. So we were the cautionary tale. And even though you work for Business Insider, your stories in the Inquirer, the largest newspaper, were the only, for a long time, the only stories that actually presented what I would call the facts, because when you're fighting power, and I didn't really realize this, the government has huge voice, especially if it's President Duterte. Every news group carries what he says, what authority says. And so if you are the target, your voice just gets squashed. And we watched that when the first arrest warrant, well, it was just rumors of an arrest warrant, the Department of Justice issued a press release, and there was a whole lot of stories done about it, and none of the Filipino groups actually interviewed me except Rappler. I mean, so, and at that point, you can't, I couldn't figure out whether or not, this is December 2018, I couldn't figure out whether I wanted to just be quiet, or in the end, you can't be quiet. So thank you for writing in the Inquirer. I think that that was, you know, on something very obscure even, like the kinds of cases they threw against us were legal, corporate. Who cares? And so no one can dig through it. But all it does, it leaves a mark, a narrative mark of journalist equals criminal. And that is the narrative. It doesn't matter. The details don't matter. It's replacing reality with a narrative that becomes believable over time because a lie told a million times is a fact now, and then incites hate and anger. And all meant to dehumanize you. Lila de Lima was the first one where we saw this deployed, right? The sexualized attacks against her, the video that weren't facts, that weren't true, but yet our House of Representatives was even thinking of playing it, they said it. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying you cannot give up your rights because there's a bulldozer trying to push you off. And how do we survive? By talking. The only weapon, the only defense a journalist has in a situation like this is to shine the light. So thank you for helping us shine the light.
Just for context, Senator de Lima, there was a sex tape which turned out to be, obviously was a fraud, which they used against her to charge her with being involved in illegal drugs. And she's been in prison since 2017. She's a sitting senator in prison.
And then, sorry, Ben, you know, in that case, what they did is they released a fake video, and then that fake video was used to attack her bottom up. When you are attacked in that way, her credibility was shot. And then after that, top down from government, they took the same video and talked about it officially. Which then spread it even more because traditional news groups picked up what the lawmaker said. So that is how you tear a person apart. That's happened to me, right? So,
I guess for both of you, and also for Ramona, since you produced previous documentaries that talked about another era, there's a lot of talk about how this is actually a return to the Marcos years. I mean, I also grew up during the Marcos years where media was totally controlled. Can you talk about your own reflections on how the Philippines is wrestling with this change, with this slide back into dictatorship?
It's the same but different, right? Because there's still this sort of pretense to a rule of law, right? There's no martial law. So it's a sort of all under this veil of legitimacy, right? That's why they, listen, Duterte doesn't just nationalize ABS-CBN like Marcos did, right? He takes it through the courts, like the franchise is not renewed, right? Maria, they take her through like 8 cases. She has 8 cases with the government that are also opaque in a way because they're like cyber libel, anti-dummy, tax evasion. It's like things that are not clear narratively. You know, you have to, it's very circuitous, and that's I think intentional, right? Because it's not, people cannot wrap their heads around it. And so the question is, wait, tax evasion, did she not pay her taxes? Is she foreign owned? You know, it sort of plants doubts, which is crazy. Because if you accuse someone of subversion, dissent, right? That's so easy, right? Then it's easy to wrap your head around. But this one is under the guise of, I don't know, it's legitimate. So it's harder. And that's why they can say, well, what is Maria Ressa talking about freedom of, that there's no press freedom in the Philippines? She's allowed to give a presser right after she's convicted. Of course there's freedom of the press, but then they gloss over the nuance, right? Because there is fear. Now there's this anti-terror law. There's fear that you can speak out and be arrested. She's being arrested for trumped up charges. So it's very subtle, but it's scarier in a way because it's not clear.
Maria?
That was a great description. Look, I think the Philippines is a case study of how digital authoritarians work, right? President Duterte was democratically elected. He was democratically elected 1 month before Brexit. I think this is when the dominoes fell, right? Then Brexit, then all of the other elections after that. But they get democratically elected, and then they use the tools of democracy to cave it in from the inside. I would say we lost our institutions. Were always weak to begin with. We have endemic corruption. And then within 6 months of President Duterte taking office, you know, we essentially lost the checks and balances. And definitely with ABS-CBN, you have a captured legislature. A small working group denied their franchise. But even before that, you had a small regulatory agency telling them to shut down. So the same thing was done to us in January 2018. Our regulatory agency is the SEC, and we were essentially told to shut down. We did not, because we believe, even though the law was being weaponized, we believed that this is unjust, that they have nothing to stand on, and we're not just going to take it sitting down. So look, 2016, you said this, bottom up, the narrative journalist equals criminal on social media, then top down in 2017, then 2018, 11 cases and investigations filed by the government against us, starting with January, taking away our permit, our license to operate. 2019, I had 8 arrest warrants, 8 criminal charges, and 2020, so I spent most of 2019 in court. There's weeks where I was in 4 different courtrooms. That's okay. I spent 90% of my time dealing with this. It is meant to be a war of attrition. It is meant to take away, it's meant to bankrupt us, right? And the only reason we survived all of this is because we held the line, and our community, actually our crowdfunding, helped pay our legal fees, which are exponential as well. And then finally, 2020, a colleague and I are convicted on June 15th of a law that's retroactively applied. I mean, I can't even, anyway, so long-winded way. I guess I wanted to just bring it out a little bit from us to Orban in Hungary. Here are the other digital authoritarians, right, who are using the pandemic to actually consolidate power. That's happening here as well. In Poland, you have a Law and Justice Party where you have these links of social media networks. In Venezuela, there was a network that was there that was then used in Spain, working with Vox. So you kind of have like a nervous system now of networks on social media that help digital authoritarians. That's scary.
The film, and you've been active in this issue, Maria, touches on the role of social media in informing the public, misinforming the public, and creating this climate and confusion. We've actually met with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg himself to discuss the way the role that the platform is playing in this. And you told a story about how during that meeting, you told Zuckerberg, hey, 97% of the Philippine population is on Facebook. And he had a curious response, right? What are the other 3% doing, Maria? So what kind of follow-up conversations have you had with Facebook or maybe with Zuckerberg himself? And are they doing enough, do you think?
They're not doing enough. And I have had lots of follow-ups because we are one of Facebook's fact-checking partners. We're one of 2 Filipino fact-checking partners for Facebook here, right? And that happened almost a year after I had met with Mark Zuckerberg. I think that the biggest problem that we have is the Silicon Valley's decisions, how they make them for everyone all around the world. And yet how countries like us, Myanmar, where genocide has already been proven both by the UN and Facebook itself, Sri Lanka, India, in all of our countries, the impact is murder in many instances, right? People are dying because of this. And yet the level of denial, and then it's no longer denial. The social media platforms have done things that they never did against political disinformation. They've taken down content. They've labeled presidents' tweets and posts. they're learning to be gatekeepers. So here's the reality: is they took away the power from news groups of being gatekeepers. But hand in hand with that, which comes with revenues, is the responsibility, the value of protecting the public sphere. And the reality is that social media platforms have now become behavioral modification systems. The micro-targeting that they have allows them to take what they know about us, and they know a lot about us from our data, and serve our weakest moment, our most vulnerable moment, to a message, to a company or a government. Anybody who wants to manipulate us, we are for sale to the highest bidder. We are Pavlov's dogs willingly doing this. But they already know the consequences of the choices they've made. It's just there's no incentive for them to change it. How much money? It's tens of billions of dollars that they've made year on year. Every time Facebook tries to do something about data privacy, the market actually punishes them. They lose share value, right? And then in terms of well, look, let me try to be optimistic. I feel like I believe it's really important to get Silicon Valley to get this right, because, well, you Americans have a lot more now to do with it, and you have a lot more power to make them change, because I cannot think how you will have integrity of elections if we do not have integrity of facts on social media. And we don't, because right now a lie laced with anger and hate spreads faster and further than facts, which are really boring. That's what journalists have to deal with. That's what human rights activists have to deal with. Anyway, sorry, Ben. I mean, I've taken it further, right? But this is my greatest frustration, and in Pareto principle, I spend a lot more time with the social media platforms than I should. But because I also know that if they made a decision to fix what they've broken, it would cascade globally. But the first step to that is to actually own the problem, and they're not there yet.
Is there no pushback from within the Philippines? Is there still, in terms of trust, aren't people also thinking? I have a lot of friends who said I've given up on Facebook because they just don't want the misinformation and the meanness, and that's also true for the United States. How is it in the Philippines?
Facebook is our internet. Since, I told Mark that in April of 2017, I think, right? Today, it's 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. So Facebook truly is our internet. And for the 5th year running, Filipinos spend the most time on social media globally. This is We Are Social and Hootsuite. So it's impossible. It's like trying to tell us to not breathe oxygen, no matter how polluted it is. We have to inhale. So and I guess our battle today is against impunity. It's impunity in the drug war of Duterte. It's impunity of the corruption, the levels of corruption. And then it's also the impunity of Silicon Valley. Because despite the killings, despite the genocide, how much more? No one is held accountable. Not the platforms, not the governments, not the users. The users are the ones who bear the brunt.
The Philippines has also, the history of media repression, the Philippines has that. But it also has a tradition of journalists fighting back, right? Especially during the Marcos dictatorship. Many of them were actually even women. One of the main organizations that have been active was the Women Writers in Media Now. Includes a mutual friend of ours, whom Ramona also mentioned, Sheila Coronel, who's the co-founder of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, which was mentioned in the film, and who is now the academic team at the Columbia Journalism School, and should have been leading this panel actually with you and Ramona, but could not do it because of another commitment. My question is, what lessons from that past, from that history, do you think are most important to keep in mind as Filipino journalists navigate this new era of repression and as you face off with the new dictatorship?
Oh, that would be you, Maria.
Oh, what lessons? Well, look. A few weeks ago, when ABS-CBN was denied its franchise, I went back over all the history books. And I spent 3 days and I was horrified by what I remembered. Well, what I reread, because it's essentially, it really is Back to the Future. It is, it was a day after President Duterte said that he didn't have to declare martial law to get rid of an oligarch. These are narratives from 1972. Marcos said that. The Lopezes, the owners of ABS-CBN, were charged with tax evasion. That was also interesting, considering that I was here dealing with these tax evasion stuff, except the courts at that time were even more independent because they threw it out, right? So the narratives are the same. Oligarch, not true anymore. And what we've seen over time is that one oligarch is replaced by another oligarch. And the whole Marcos Aquino saga plays out every time. It is about power and money. It is about cronyism. And there's almost this built-in, like, once I get power, me and my friends and I can take over, which is the mentality here. It's garapal in Tagalog. Garapal is beyond brazen. What's the right translation for garapal?
Greedy beyond measure, right? It's like greedy, exponential greed. Isn't it? Like, I don't know. Anyway.
So that's so what can we learn from history? I think that that yes, President Duterte is the most powerful leader our nation has ever had, because he boasted he didn't even have to declare martial law. The conditions of COVID-19 gave him martial law without him having to declare it. So there's an insidious the lawfare. This is how Senator De Lima refers to the weaponization of the lawfare. Essentially, what he wants, all he does is he signals what he wants, and then the forces of government work to carry it out. And he does it publicly. It's the way he governed Davao, right? So when he attacked Rappler, a week later, we got our first subpoena. And he did this in his State of the Nation address. So it's almost like we have a dictatorship that is masquerading as a democracy with rule of law. Masquerading. And I guess that's why, what's the lesson learned? Well, so I read past 1972, which is when martial law was declared. ABS-CBN was shut down for 14 years. And then I read into the late 70s, the 80s, the death of Ninoy Aquino. His death sparked outrage. It took another 3 years for people power. So I tried to go through that sequence, and I wondered what happens in this day and age. How will that be operationalized? Because certainly it seems like it's the same playbook that the government has. And what we've seen during this time in 2020 is a consolidation of power. Brazenly again, garapal again, just like the corruption. It's a brazen consolidation of power at a time when, here's the upside, the government actually needs to perform like in the United States against the virus, and using tactics of violence and fear, of us against them, demonizing the perceived enemy of the government, mobilizing its army of both real people and social media networks. That doesn't work against the virus. The government must perform. And we are, in our 21st week, the government isn't performing very well. And it is, for the first time, we're seeing on social media, hashtag Oust Duterte Now. And then after the anti-terror law was put in place. So Oust Duterte Now kicked in, #1 in the Philippines, #1 globally, after President Duterte, in a late night rambling talk, told the police to shoot them dead. That is a direct quote. And he was talking about quarantine violators, right? It's again this narrative that Filipinos are undisciplined and you should hold them, like pound them. So where does it leave us? It depends on Filipinos. Right now, after the anti-terror law, that hashtag Oust Duterte became hashtag Oust Du, and then a little icon of a turtle. Hashtag Oust Duturtle. Because if you do hashtag Oust Duterte Now, people are afraid that they could be hauled to jail. They could be arrested without a warrant. That's what the anti-terror law provides for. Anyone can now be arrested without a warrant if you're declared a terrorist, and then jailed for up to 24 days. Wow, that's really depressing. Let me give you the upside. What's the upside? The upside is that there's a virus. You can't demonize a virus. Government must perform competently. This isn't just a propaganda war. And Filipinos are demanding that because our lives are on the line.
There's also great anger, right? I mean, it's getting to a boiling point. There's anger, I think. But the problem is, it is lockdown, right? You can't really go out and protest. Also, there's no one to organize on the other side, right? There is this, they need a shooting star, right? To rise and really harness the anger and the deep, I think, regret that that we're back to, that they took their eyes off the ball. Because it takes forever, generations to build institutions, and little did we know how fragile the institution is, right? So I think, yeah, that's what's missing. I think this great a shooting star, as someone to really harness all this and organize on the other side, because Duterte and his allies are very, very well organized. I saw them at the midterm elections. I saw how organized they were and how well resourced. They have a lot of resources.
What is the mood among journalists, especially those who went through this in the past, in terms of how they're seeing this going to play out? I mean, ABS-CBN, of course, has been shut down, but they're still, shifting to online. They're pushing back. What about the others, like for radio, online news?
So first of all, that's a false equivalence, and I think they're making the best out of a bad thing. Losing a broadcast network, the most powerful in the country, that reaches parts of this country that nothing else reaches, is nothing compared to digital, right? Because look, yes, COVID dumped us all in digital, but still, that should never have happened. And the government is saying now that, well, look, they're still there. And that's like, hello, press freedom doesn't exist if you have to face going to jail, or you have to like twist yourself inside out to be able to write a story. That's first. Number two, I think, is that the reporters are all up in arms because we can see it, unless you've been co-opted or corrupted. And there are many of those as well, right? It's definitely, but in general, the reporters are in fighting form because we see it. The reporters see it. But each of the networks, each of the major news organizations are run by business people. And what we are seeing is that those are the ones targeted by the government. You can see it. The Philippine Daily Inquirer, who you used to write for, and this is the first target of attack of President Duterte for a photo from the drug war that was like a pieta, is the way we nicknamed it, right? The government filed cases against the family, and within 2 weeks, with very little fanfare, they said that they were willing to sell the newspaper. And the first suitor was a crony. The second was ABS-CBN, and they now are shut down. We were the third. So if you attack the business and the owners have other business interests, that's used to both corrupt and co-opt. And I think that's where we are. It is still, violence and fear is still President Duterte's favorite tactics of governance, and journalists are trying to do their jobs, but in general, the conditions and social media are tearing us apart so much that I wonder whether we can focus. That's what's missing. And in the time leading up to 2014, when social media and Rappler embraced social media, in the time before social media, news organizations would build on each other's investigative reports. We can focus the public sphere. In the age of a fragmented and in the age of social media manipulation, it's so easy to attack the journalist. In fact, that's the first that's the first weapon. And these attacks work. I've watched my career, by next year I'll have been a journalist for 35 years. And everything that I worked so hard for, pounded away, 1,000 cuts, to the point that there are Filipinos who believe I'm corrupt or a tax evader, or, the narrative is what's enforced. And who is responsible for that? Who is held accountable? I suppose if you think about it, who would listen first? That's why I'm still going to Silicon Valley first. Don't enable this, so that this way we have a fighting chance.
Mona?
You're muted.
Yeah, I am muted. Sorry, I drank water, so I didn't. What is the question about journalists?
What are people doing?
What? No, I can't really respond to that because I'm not in the Philippines. I'm not. Yeah. So, but yeah, I can't.
Okay. Let me read. I have a couple of questions from our viewers. So one said, "Thank you for generously sharing a lot of the behind-the-scenes detail. When I saw part of the film where the opposition party candidates publicly criticized Duterte's war on drugs, I couldn't stop wondering whether it is safe for these politicians to take a strong stand against what the president did. So what kind of danger are they facing, especially when they lost the campaign?"
Well, we featured Samira Gutok.
Yeah.
So in a way, she really went after the president, but he never came after her, which was very, and we figured out why, because she is from the South, right? She's Muslim also. She's from the South, she's from Mindanao. And so he couldn't really go after her. And she realized this during the campaign, and that's why she felt very empowered to keep going after him. And that's why I thought she was very interesting to follow.
I'll jump in and say, what are they facing? Aside from a roller coaster where, if you actually speak your mind and you do it with evidence, you don't know what can happen to you. Just a few days ago, a leader, an NGO leader, an Akpawis chair, was killed in his own home. He's old. He was an old gentleman, a very gentle soul. You know who he is. Maybe you can say more, but he was killed. And then the police took his body away from his family, and now they're saying that there was no forced entry. I mean, I don't recognize the Philippines, right? And that makes me so sad.
Another question. Maria is saying that the government has to perform in the face of a virus, but can't the government also control the metrics of performance against which it could be measured?
Absolutely. Sorry, go, Ben. You answer that question, Ben. Go. Yes, absolutely. Right? Are we foolish? Yes, slightly. I don't think we have a choice. Look, the drug war numbers. They were changed in front of our eyes. The reason we were attacked is because we kept reminding them. Mm-hmm. This is what you said. This is what you're saying now. What do you do?
Talking about the official police numbers were really high, and it was coming from them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, even the official numbers are high. I mean, let's face it, 4,000 is a high number. What is it? 4,000, 4,500? I mean,
or now, 6,000. They've admitted killing 6,000.
But these are the admitted killings. So even if you just go by that, that's horrific, right? That in itself is horrific, and people should be more shocked than they are, I think. But, there are just so many things coming at you. And these numbers become normalized in a way, right? They become normal, which is the danger, because you live with all these cuts, and then you get numb and you forget that it's not supposed to be that way. You should be.
It's 1,000 cuts. That's why it's 1,000 cuts, right? It is. That's I think and that's funny because that phrase for me came from Al Qaeda. That's where I first heard it. not Taylor Swift. So,
Oh, really? Oh, that's so disappointing. Oh, well, okay, that's good.
All right, another question. In terms of a fighting chance, what do all the panelists think of news literacy education for the public? Is it a viable solution?
It is, but it'll take too long, right? Right now, especially, right? I think, yes, absolutely. Media literacy, that's important. But right now, it's really just realizing that we are all victims of this disinformation and fake news and whatever you want to call it. And to really, and that's the first step, to know that it is out there, you are the victim, and you should try to really be critical about everything you read on the internet, and don't keep sharing everything. Especially, you tend to share without before reading it. Read it, see what the sources are, see if you trust the source, and think about it for a bit. Do you really have to share everything? You don't really, right? But yeah, I think media literacy is important, but that's sort of the long game. And right now we have elections in November, so we really don't have time. So it's really what can we do now, right? And right now you just really need to be critical thinkers and be like just not passive consumers of news, right? You really have to be critical about everything you consume.
So Ramona slipped from the Philippines to the United States, and that's very easy for us to do, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So media literacy is at best a medium to long-term solution, because what is happening to us right now is we are being insidiously manipulated. And I'll use Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. The two types of thinking fast, thinking slow. Social media, so journalists, facts, are thinking slow processes. Social media is a thinking fast process. It bypasses our rational mind. It manipulates our emotions. And you cannot fight a thinking fast process with a thinking slow solution. That's been the problem, which is why built into the design of social media is, it was the manipulation of people. But what we need to do here is to understand it, because what social media also has done, and sorry, I'm because I think this is the crucial problem that we all have to deal with. Reducing people, dehumanizing people to hate. These types of propaganda tactics have been around forever. Hitler in Germany dehumanized the Jews and enabled slaughter, right? Stalin did the exact same thing. Now, when you add social media to the mix, it's like an atom bomb went off in our information ecosystem, and we're not acknowledging it. So it's a very asymmetrical war right now, and Facebook's solution is media literacy. Mm-hmm. I think that bypasses its direct role in creating a system of manipulation. It really needs to look at that. And I think the last thing I'll say on this is just tell you how one decision by a tech person, a coder it could be, or the guys who were building these platforms, one decision builds division into all of our society, builds in this us against them mentality. And it was the decision for growth. Like, how do they grow the platforms? And this is all social media platforms. They grow it using friends of friends. That idea, right? Because they realized from our behavior that if they recommend friends of friends, that we will be more likely to click it and accept the friends. But when you do that, this is what happens. So let's say this is the center of the public sphere where we all agree on facts. And then let's say that the pro-Trump people are recommended, they take the recommendations of friends and they move further away. Because there are more of them, they're talking to each other, they're listening to each other. The anti-Trump people move further away because the same thing has happened, and they're growing in scope and numbers, and they keep moving further away from each other. So they never see the other side. And here, this this tearing apart is exactly how facts become debatable. And that needs to get fixed because the incentives of power and money are on the side of the dictators who are using the social media platform to consolidate and retain power.
I'd like to ask a question and we focus on the members of the AAJA, particularly the young journalists who are starting their careers and during this difficult time. It should be noted AAJA marks its 40th anniversary next year. And, this began as an activist organization fighting for diversity, coverage in newsrooms. And some of the prominent AAJA pioneers are going to, I think she's going to be speaking later this week, like Helen Zia, played critical roles in major Asian American civil rights battles. And I'd like to fight for justice for Vincent Chin and Wen Ho Lee. Can you share your own thoughts on how you strike a balance between journalism and activism? I think there was an NPR story where you discussed that a little bit.
I was a very traditional journalist in standards and ethics before we came under attack, right? And before I began to really understand what was happening on social media. Today, when you're caught in a battle for facts, journalism is activism.
So by traditional, you mean you're not supposed to get involved in any causes or anything like that? Right?
From my CNN days, right? When I was with CNN, I would fly into a country and then do a story and then fly out, and you're not involved in any way. And it was a time when journalists weren't personally attacked. Women journalists, by the way, are attacked at least 10 times more in the Philippines. That's what our data shows us. But the time I was with CNN, I think, the reporter's not personally attacked. The organization steps in front of you. So we could still have we're not being manipulated. We can tell the story the way we see it. But the standards and ethics manual. So look, I think the other thing is that this whole thing about objectivity. Even when I was with CNN, I used to say that objectivity is actually not journalism, right? Because no one can be objective. I replaced someone in Manila who was 6'2". I'm 5'2". That foot difference changes our perspective of the world. I'm Asian American, I'm Filipino American. He's not, he's WASP, right? So that's a huge difference. And I think what journalists should strive for always is, to take the facts and provide context. Context is everything. And to be transparent in today's digital age, that's actually the new objective, I think, right? That if we are transparent, like how can I do an interview with a government official without telling you that the government has filed 8 criminal charges against me? I must say that because that colors everything. So, oh Lord, so I guess I'm just saying that thinking slow processes are secondary. And this is why the onus in the short term really is on Silicon Valley. The change in our information ecosystem. At the beginning, Rappler embraced it as good. We thought it was an enabler, like it was in Tahrir Square in 2011, which it was. But then from 2011 until today, the governments learned to use it and turned it against the freedom fighters. This is something, it's not just journalists who come under attack. It is human rights activists. It is opposition politicians here in the Philippines. It is anyone who is dangerous, who speaks truth to power, which is the definition of journalism, right? So how do we deal with that? I think the other part, Ben, is we've got to report a lot more on technology. And the second layer of that is what kind of regulations are necessary globally? Because if you asked me 2 years ago, did I want regulation? No, I actually said no. Let the social media platforms, they know it best. And this is assuming that they would do what is right for the public sphere. Well, that's not what they've done. So I think regulation is imperative.
I want to read more questions. Here's one. In light of Duterte's lewd comments, where are the feminist groups and the churches that were instrumental during the Marcos regime? And
You
maybe
want
that were instrumental, that were active during the Marcos regime in terms of opposing them.
process? Go,
I
Ramona.
think, yeah, the church was quiet. I mean, look, Duterte won without hitting priests, right? And hitting the church. No other president has ever won going after the church. And yet he still won the presidency. And I think the church was quiet for a long time and didn't really respond, right? Even as he was going out and really insulting priests and Catholics. It was amazing to see him get away with it. But I think they're coming around. Also, the church leadership has changed, so I think they're coming around and finding their voice again. The voice of protest, right? They're speaking out. But for a long time they didn't, and which was really befuddling because he was coming after them, and I think they are right. That's my sort of observation from sitting here in Baltimore.
Yes. So for a while, the head of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines was from Davao. So again, remember the 3 C's: corrupt, coerce, co-opt. Corrupt, coerce, co-opt. Every single part, whether it is the church or business, or because at the beginning of the 4 years ago when President Duterte took office, normally at that time period, a leader would heal, would bring everyone together. As you've seen in the United States and as we've seen in the Philippines, these leaders today are still hitting us against them, right? So it is us against them, and nobody wants to be the them when power is so vast. And I think that's part of it. But having said that, Ramona is right that the church is kicking in. It has made extremely strong statements, and part of that is because the leadership also has changed, although it's temporary. The second is you're seeing business. Our economy is caving in. These are the things that are kind of similar to 1972, right? And then how it led to 1986. The economy caving in, loads of loans and debt, exponential debt that the Marcos government went to their pockets. The estimate of $5 to $10 billion that was stolen from the government, right? That's the same. We have similar things now. We have gotten trillions of pesos in debt to deal with COVID. Where is it going? There's a high-profile corruption inquiry at the Senate right now where you can see massive corruption has happened. And the kinds of excuses that we're getting is, well, it's COVID, or well, it's excuses. And it's because of the propaganda machine on social media, those excuses are being pounded to become facts. So they're still there, I guess, is the short answer to the question. Is those groups are there, but using violence and fear took its toll. People are afraid. But now that we're seeing this resurgence, and I guess I told you that, there's the silver lining is, I think, and I've said this all the time in the Philippines, I think this is one of those times that we have to figure out what you're willing to sacrifice for facts, for truth. And it's going to have to be every single one of us, because the journalists alone can't do this. The church obviously can't do it on its own. And it's been eroded. All of our institutions have been eroded. And let me just remind you of what Russian disinformation's target is. Its goal is not to make you believe one thing. Its goal, all of influence operations, is just to make you doubt, to make you confused so that you don't know whom or what to believe. If you're in that state, then you cannot vote. Then you don't know who to hold to account. And the person with the largest megaphone, the person in power, gains more power. It is a scorched earth policy to power.
Question for you, Maria. Having watched the documentary and seeing many of the obstacles that you have faced since the election of Duterte, I'm always curious that you always try to smile in the face of great adversity. How do you do it? How do you find the courage?
I think A Thousand Cuts is meant to, make you ignore each one of the little cuts. And the way I dealt with it, and I'm still trying to find the right way of doing it, is, I think that every time they try to take away your rights, you have to hold on to it. You have to hold the line. And why do I smile? I don't know. That's the way I am. I don't, I think it was, when the first time I got arrested, Secretary Panello, who was the press secretary, he said, she must be enjoying it, because she's smiling all the time. I wanted to say things that I shouldn't be saying in public, but it's what rapists say. But what did you do?
You went there, Maria.
I couldn't help it because it got. Anyway. I'm just
it's true though, but yeah.
She's laughing, but I guess she watched me through most of it, and it's still going on. And the best way to do it is something I learned from being a TV reporter. All hell can break loose around you.
Uh-huh.
But when you have to do your live shot, you have to have clarity of thought, and you have to take your emotions and push it down. It's been 4 years of pushing it down. So it's not so easy anymore, right? I'm learning anger management. But it's not just about me, and it is not about Rappler. This is, it is about every one of us. And so I have to have clarity of thought to tell you that.
And it should be noted, Marie used to cover terrorist organizations in Southern Philippines and Indonesia, right? One question for Ramona. Ramona, and actually this is also my question. How did you gain access to Mocha Uson, who's one of Duterte's supporters, and his other allies?
How to Mocha Uson? I asked, right? I mean, she's also like I've also done a lot of other films, right? This is my fifth feature film, sixth even, right? If you count Spirits Rising, it's my fifth. She was familiar with my other work, and I'm very transparent. My ask is very transparent. I told her what I wanted to do. And I also, when I approach someone, I don't, it's really not for me about trying to catch them acting badly, right? It's not about the gotcha moment. So my approach, what I told her was, I really wanted to know what her story was, because I know that no one is an anti-hero in their own narrative, right? They're always the hero of their personal history. And I just wanted to know why. And I wanted to know her personal history. Was there really a reason for, her reason for really being loyal to Duterte? And it so happens there was, right? It's really very part of her father, the story of the assassination of her father. And she's also a public figure. She understands the power of narrative. She also understands that I make films beyond just showing it in the Philippines, right? Because although I make it there, I produce it here. So I have I really sort of speak to a Western audience. And she understood that. And she wanted to reach that audience, is my belief. That's why she said yes.
How did she react, or has she reacted?
I hear she reacted, but it's not clear. I'm still waiting. But to be fair, she was really open with us, right? She was really, I thought I treated her fairly in the film. So yeah, I'd be curious. So if anyone out there wants to tell me how she reacted, I'm really, really curious. I want to know.
Maria, what's been the most striking reaction to the film that you've encountered?
It's hard to say because, I think the first time I watched it, when we saw it at Sundance, the founders were all there, and we all kind of were shell-shocked after we watched it, because when you put it all together, it's a different thing. What's the most, my parents, my parents are parents, right? And I won't tell you what they said, but I'm really just happy that that you care enough to watch it.
Mhm. Okay. All right. On that note, I'd like to thank AAJA for this opportunity. Of course, thank you, Ramona, for A Thousand Cuts and the compelling documentaries you produced in the past, and we certainly look forward to more films. And of course,
Yeah, thank you AAJA for having us, you know, and for thank you for watching the film and for this panel. Really appreciate it.
and thank you, Maria, for making time to join us and your courage. And thanks to the Rappler team. I'm going to mention some of their names, including the top editors, Glenda Gloria, Chai Opiliana, Beth Frondoso, and of course the two amazing, courageous reporters that were featured in the film, Tia Renada and Patricia Evangelista. And there are many of us
And also
here.
Rambo Talabong, who covers the police. Yeah.
Not the first name for a cop reporter.
Yeah.
There are many of us here who are inspired by your work, and of course, we support you as you face this this tough situation in the Philippines. And any final words, Maria?
I think, you know, it's the same thing. Like, realize this time is, we're living through history. And it is, I think this is the time where we're going to determine, our actions will determine what our future is going to be. Is it really a rise of tyranny globally? Because that's what we're seeing happen. Or is democracy, no matter how flawed, will that survive? And, you know, I guess the last part is every generation gets the democracy it deserves. If our generation loses it, please, please don't let that happen.
Good point. All right. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Maraming salamat.
Thank you.